Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Jeff Miller. I am a policy analyst with CSG West. CSG West is the Western Office of the Council of State Governments. I provide staff support to our Education and Workforce Development Committee, which is presenting this webinar. We have a great topic today and a couple of really interesting speakers. We're going to be talking about recruiting and keeping good teachers. There are a lot of states struggle with the need to staff both urban and rural schools, and I think we're going to talk about both, and both finding teachers and keeping them once you have them. I want to mention some logistical things. If you have questions, you should have a big box on your screen that allows you to submit questions. We're going to hold questions until the end, but feel free to submit them at any time. And then you can, if you want to direct them to a particular speaker, you can do that. If you want to direct them to both speakers, you can do that as well. And then I'll once the speakers have completed their remarks, I will start asking them those questions. This webinar is being recorded, and it'll be posted on the CSG website within probably a couple of days, and you can find it there. If you look for eCademy webinars, there's a link at the bottom of the website, I believe. And if you can't find it there, you can contact me and I'll show you how to find it. We'll have a slide at the end that has contact information for both the speakers and myself. I'm also going to try to get their PowerPoints posted to the CSG West website on my Education and Workforce Development Committee page. So one way or another, you'll be able to get the information either directly from the speakers, from me, or from CSG. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers. I'll introduce them both at the beginning, and then when Ellen finishes, she can just transition right over to Ann, and we'll move right through it. So first speaker is Dr. Ellen Sherratt. Ellen is Vice President for Policy and Research at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. In this role, she translates the National Board's vision into policy and research through partnerships with states, districts, and other stakeholders. Dr. Sherratt previously served as Deputy Director of the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at the American Institutes for Research. She's written extensively about teacher shortages, recruitment, retention, and leadership, and has co-authored 2 books on teacher quality and teacher evaluation reform. And she currently serves as president of the board of directors of the Teacher Salary Project. Second speaker is Ann Maddock. Ann is senior policy advisor at the New Teacher Center. Ann advises New Teacher Center's senior leadership and staff on state and national education policies and strategic approaches to maximizing policy impact through client engagement opportunities. Before joining the center in 2009, Ann served as North Carolina Governor Mike Easley's teacher advisor and education policy advisor from 2002 to 2009, and worked with the governor to design and implement the first in the nation statewide teacher working conditions survey in 2002. Ann taught in public secondary schools from 1976 to 2001 in North Carolina and Maryland, and was a state and national award-winning science teacher, mentor teacher, team leader, professional development trainer, and varsity basketball coach. So we'll get started with Dr. Sherratt, and I just realized I didn't even ask you if I was pronouncing your name correctly, so I'll just call you Ellen. So Ellen, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, this is Ellen Sherratt, so no problem if you say Sherratt instead. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you today on the topic of recruiting and retaining great teachers. As Jeff said, I'm the Vice President for Policy and Research at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, and I've been studying this topic of teacher shortages for the past 15 years and working with states and districts on approaches to addressing teacher shortages, specifically exploring what we can learn from the long history of this problem that I studied both within the U.S. as well as overseas. So really glad to have the chance to share some information about this with you. Next slide, please. As a backdrop, we at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards are working toward the development of a career continuum that, as in the case of medicine and law, moves practitioners along a structured path to accomplish teaching every year. So at each stage of the continuum, there are factors that exacerbate teacher shortages, as well as factors that help teachers to become more effective and to be supportive so that they will stay. For example, at the pre-service stage, we envision aspiring teachers having access to high-quality clinical experiences and access to accomplished cooperating teachers to support them in being ready from day one. At the novice stage, teachers should be supported in these early years through high-quality mentoring and induction programs, which Anne will share in much more depth about what the new Teacher Center is doing in that regard. As a professional teacher and in obtaining board certification, teachers are provided ongoing opportunities to continue to grow so that their work does not become stale. And then as a teacher leader or a school leader, they're able to deeply and broadly impact children, schools, policies, and the field at large. With the National Board, we have this target for what accomplished teachers should know and do. So there's no need to come up with anything new. The board certification process might not be perfect, but it is the best available assessment of accomplished teaching and a durable mark of teacher effectiveness. So we want to embed this within this career continuum so that we can ensure, firstly, that board certification is the norm in the profession and not an exception. And then second, that every student every year has access to accomplished teachers. But when we have teacher shortages, it can be hard to find any teacher to serve in certain classrooms, let alone an accomplished teacher. Next slide. And actually, can you advance to the next slide after that, please? So what are the factors behind teacher shortages? First, a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of presenting at the CSG West meeting on the issue of the teacher shortage dialogue and some challenges that we have with measuring and speaking coherently about the nature and extent of the teacher shortage challenge that keeps us from engaging in constructive dialogue as a policy community about what to do about the shortage, and instead promotes an ongoing black and white debate as to whether or not it's a problem or not. I won't go into detail on that topic here since you have access to the CSG West PowerPoint, but I have simply included here a link to my brief, Creating Coherence in the Teacher Shortage Debate, What Policy Leaders Should Know and Do. Other root causes of teacher shortages include teacher retention practices that tend to be more reactive and short-term focused rather than proactive, long-term, and forward-looking. And also poor teacher retention due to challenges with school leadership, challenges with working conditions, in particular, providing sufficient time for teachers to collaborate with one another, and access to sufficient resources, both instructional resources as well as the salaries. And then there's this final issue that often emerges in the policy dialogue, but then is not often addressed through policy solutions, which is this sense that there's a negative or at least not entirely positive image of the teaching profession that prevents us from recruiting and retaining the teachers that we need. Next slide. I won't go into detail here, but you can see here some data from McKinsey & Company, the strategy consulting firm that released a seminal report in 2009 that asked college students from the top third of their college class what factors they saw the teaching profession as having compared to the alternate careers that they were considering. And you see here the blue bars representing what these top third college students thought teaching offered. The green bars represent what they believe that their alternate career choices offered. So you can see all of the questions that they asked here and the gaps between what teaching is perceived to offer and what other careers are perceived to offer. If you go to the next slide, please, we pulled out the top factors that are keeping young people from entering the teaching profession. So it's being rewarded financially, having the profession pay appropriately for the skills and efforts that they would bring, having opportunities to advance professionally in the career, and being able to work in a well-resourced professional environment. So these are the areas of the largest gaps between what top third college students see between teaching and their other career options. If you go to the next slide, in terms of retention, we see from the bottom to the top factors that teachers provided for improving teacher retention. So the blue bars are those that teachers viewed as absolutely essential for improving retention, and the red bars are those seen as very important. So those bottom 7 bars were all seen by 80% or more of the respondents to a survey by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Scholastic as being really important for improving retention. So you see at the top of that is supportive leadership and also time for collaboration, access to high quality teaching resources, attractive building conditions, professional development that is relevant to their personal and school goals, higher salaries, and a collegial work environment. And this retention piece is one that's very critical. Learning Policy Institute recently released a report that showed that teacher shortages could be cut in half, or teacher shortages could be almost completely eliminated if we cut teacher attrition in half. So if we go to the next slide, please. One efficient and effective way to address these research-based recruitment and retention factors, namely collaboration, access to high-quality resources, relevant professional learning, a professional environment, and opportunities for career advancement and higher compensation, is through formal and informal roles for accomplished teachers, such as national board certification across the continuum. For example, at the pre-service stage, we should be calling on teacher leaders to serve as cooperating teachers and to expose pre-service candidates to accomplished teaching either through these cooperating teachers, but also through resources such as Atlas, the National Board's video library of accomplished teaching, which is especially useful in areas where teachers might not have access to accomplished teachers in their particular grade and subject area. At the novice stage, accomplished teachers should be serving as mentor teachers to support them getting up to speed quickly. At the career stage, we would like to see accomplished teachers leading professional learning in their schools and in their districts. And then at the teacher leader stage, board certified or other accomplished teachers should be receiving the type of compensation packages and opportunities for ongoing growth through career pathways that will help them to continue to grow and have a positive impact. In addition to these workforce policies that increase teacher recruitment and retention at each stage of the continuum, policy leaders can further make teaching a more attractive profession through opportunities that allow accomplished teachers to improve children's lives, not just within the classroom walls, but also beyond them by elevating their voice and policy at the local and state levels. So this might include things like legislators encouraging teachers to serve on task forces, visiting teachers in their classrooms. I've heard of some legislators hosting tea with teachers, and also fellowships through groups like Hope Street Group and Teach Plus and Educators for Excellence in America Achieves, where accomplished teachers are provided opportunities to deeply engage in developing legislation and advocating to see it through. Next slide, please. So other examples of approaches that states have taken to addressing teacher shortages, both in the short term and in the long term, include, well, starting with the long term. In South Dakota, there's been promising results of their effort to introduce a half-penny sales tax to boost teacher salaries and restore stipends for national board certified teachers, also to amend reciprocity rules in order to recruit teachers from other states. But importantly, this was a highly collaborative effort of legislators, the governor, the chief, key business leaders, and others throughout the state actually coming together to make this happen. In Texas, where they're dealing in particular with rural teacher recruitment and retention problems, the state convened over the past year a rural teacher task force where districts came together to explore ways to address this issue in their context. And they came up with several promising recommendations, including a social media campaign that would promote teaching as a profession, as well as financial incentives. In Alaska and Kentucky, the states are working closely with Educators Rising, which is providing an opportunity for high schools to cultivate the interest in high school students in going into the teaching profession and create a grow your own model so that they can recruit locally among talented young people who are likely to stay in the community. In New York, the Teach New York initiative of the State University of New York and state agency partners is working to recruit and retain the best and brightest into the teaching profession. And the idea is that SUNY, the State University of New York, has the capacity to reach into communities to expand relationships and build partnerships that will allow them to increase their teacher supply. Although we would recommend focusing on these long-term solutions rather than short-term solutions that tend to not resolve teacher shortages over time, we understand that legislators also need to consider approaches to addressing teacher recruitment in the here and now. And so some of the other examples that you see here are from Nevada, where international partnerships with the Philippines have allowed them to significantly increase their teacher pool from overseas. Likewise, North Carolina's Visiting International Faculty program has been around since 1989 and has been working with 48 different countries to bring teachers to their state. In Washington, legislation has made it easier for retired teachers to come back into the classroom without penalty. So these are just some of the ideas out there for short-term teacher recruitment solutions that don't require states to lower their standards for teachers and students. Next slide, please. Of course, we don't want to omit policy solutions related to the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. In this map, you can see highlighted in yellow the 25 states that have legislation in place that recognizes National Board Certified Teachers through stipends. 10 states in particular award stipends for National Board Certified Teachers in high-need schools where we know teacher recruitment and retention tend to be most challenging. We also have recently seen research on specific National Board initiatives such as our professional development school model, where cohorts of teachers within the structure of their school or district's professional development system go through the National Board certification process together. And in Clark County, where this approach was, Clark County, Nevada, where this approach was implemented in schools with historically high turnover, we found that that 98% of teachers stayed in the high-need schools where they were working after going through this school-based cohort model of National Board certification, and the 2% that did leave left for other high-need schools within the district. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, we're expecting to see the final Every Student Succeeds Act plans submitted by states to the U.S. Department of Education next week. I wrote a blog piece, the link to it is at the bottom of this slide, that looks at the first 17 ESSA state plans that were submitted and what they show are some of the forthcoming state priorities around the country for addressing teacher shortages specifically. And they include strategies related to strengthening the pre-college teacher pipeline, particularly through programs like Educators Rising that I mentioned that provide opportunities to grow your own by encouraging high school students as well as paraprofessionals to go into the teaching profession. We've seen strategies related to more strategic and purposeful teacher recruitment. In New Jersey and Connecticut, for example, the states are looking to create marketing campaigns to promote the teaching profession. And in Tennessee, they're offering courses on teaching as a profession, as well as partnering with Educators Rising. We're seeing approaches in many states related to supporting new teachers, which I won't delve into since Anne will speak to that topic at length, but also approaches to improving teacher compensation at various stages along the continuum. In Arizona, they're looking to introduce incentives and scholarships for aspiring teachers. In Nevada, new teacher recruitment stipends. In Maine, stipends to reward longevity. And then in New Mexico, we're also seeing things like debit cards being introduced to support teachers in purchasing classroom supplies. And then we're also seeing a lot of innovative work in these ESSA plans to promote teacher leadership. In New Mexico in particular, we're seeing a teacher leader network and a summit to bring teacher leaders across the state together, as well as a teacher leader advisory group. In Louisiana, the ESSA plan highlights their 80 teacher leader advisors who will provide support to teacher leaders around the state, along with webinars and, as in New Mexico, an annual summit. Next slide. So the final issue on that list of root causes behind teacher shortage was the idea that there is a negative or not wholly positive image of the teaching profession. And this is something that we often hear in the policy discourse around the teaching profession, but we don't often see policy solutions geared towards, quite possibly because it's just such a large challenge and it's not immediately clear how policy can turn around something like the image of a profession. But this does create real challenges, both for teacher recruitment and for teacher retention. This challenge is due partly to what we see in the media, but also sometimes policies that have lower teacher morale, specifically by reducing resources, stifling teachers' creativity, and otherwise making teachers feel like they're marginalized, rather than that they are in fact driving the policies that affect their working lives. Although it can seem challenging to surmount issues related to this, we have seen it done in other countries. For example, Singapore has an attrition rate of less than 3%, and Ontario, Canada has one of 4%, which is just half of the attrition rate that we see in the US. Linda Darling-Hammond recently released a book, Empowered Educators, which looks at Finland, Singapore, Shanghai, and other provinces in Canada and Australia, where they've managed to turn around the teaching profession to create a situation where they really don't suffer problems with teacher recruitment and retention. Some of the themes that they found that are common across these high-performing systems include cultivating a high social regard for teaching, establishing professional standards that outline what teachers should know and do, constructing teaching as a collaborative rather than an isolated occupation, and treating teacher development as a continuum. So taken together, two themes really stand out from their international research. First, these countries have focused on building effective systems rather than chasing after silver bullets or short-term, narrowly focused solutions to their teacher shortages. And second, these countries have held at the core of their work a commitment to professionalizing teaching, tackling the cultural, systemic, and structural barriers that stand in their way. The National Board is working here and now to create similar transformations in the U.S., and we certainly welcome partners from state legislators and all stakeholder groups to work with accomplished teachers toward this end. Next slide. So the key takeaways are that policies that build a coherent career continuum that moves every teacher every year toward accomplished practice will elevate the profession and help rectify teacher shortages. And second, engaging accomplished teachers across the country as teacher leaders both within their schools but also outside of their schools and contributing to the policy development process will create short-term and long-term solutions to teacher shortages that don't require lowering standards for teachers and for students. And the next slide. Thank you very, very much. I've included my contact details here, and you'll find them again at the end of the entire webinar. We'd be glad to connect with you to discuss how we can support your states in moving forward with some of these approaches that are relevant in your own context.
Hi, this is Ann Maddock with the New Teacher Center, and you'll probably hear me reference NTC instead of New Teacher Center each time. So when I say NTC, that's what I'm meaning. Next slide, please. I want to share with you, first of all, a little bit about New Teacher Center. We are a national nonprofit organization, and our vision is to help every child have an excellent teacher, no matter their zip code. Next slide. You can see the vast reach that we have at the New Teacher Center across the nation. We've touched more than 3.4 million students, upwards of 40,000 teachers supported and trained, and almost 8,000 mentors and coaches across the country. Next slide. So our work in education demands that we understand and address the issues around teacher retention because of our very name of the organization. And what I want to do is take a look at some of the challenges associated with teacher turnover that are a little bit different, or in addition, I should say, than to what Ellen discussed in her part of the webinar. Next slide. One is the cost. The cost of teacher attrition is huge. 1 in 5 new teachers quit in the first 5 years across the country. More than 50% of teachers in high-need districts leave within 5 years, and states spend between $1 and $2 billion per year on teacher turnover. Next slide. The costs are high, not only to the state and to the systems, but to each district. The cost of replacing a new teacher per district ranges anywhere from $6,000 to $8,700 in urban districts. Next slide. And there's a trend in the United States in the past 30 years. It used to be that experienced teachers outnumbered new teachers, and the greening of the teaching force is evident. Dr. Richard Ingersoll from the University of Pennsylvania noted in his research that this greening effort has many new teachers at the beginning of their experience, far outweighing the teachers that have much more experience. Therefore, the demand for supporting these new teachers continues to increase. New slide. The teachers who are staying or are entering the classroom facing heightened challenges. They aren't getting effective professional learning that they need to do their jobs well. Almost half feel there isn't a shared vision between teachers and school leaders. This is important because you'll see that in some research that I referenced in a little bit later on, that this is one of the closely connected pieces to student achievement. 35% are saying they aren't getting the feedback they need to make themselves improve and get better. Next slide. Equity demands that we act. Generally, the beginning teachers are going to be less effective than their more experienced peers. new teachers are disproportionately assigned to the most challenging schools and classrooms. Despite good intentions, these new teachers have yet to develop their skills and knowledge, and as a result, they are often less effective than experienced colleagues in helping students learn. Thus, the students most in need of the most highly accomplished teachers are more likely to be taught by the least effective ones. Next slide. So, New Teacher Center, what we do is we actually have a few different prong approach to addressing teacher recruitment and retention. We help states and districts address retention in two important pieces of our work. The first of which is by providing high quality, research-based induction and mentoring. This is not just providing a mentor for new teachers. But before we talk about more of those components, let's look a little bit at the national growth of induction programs across the country. Next slide. Since the early 1990s, the national growth of induction for new teachers has grown tremendously. From 52% of teachers receiving support in 1994 to 84% receiving it in 2011. That couples along with the greening of the American teaching force, and this makes sense. Next slide. National research has shown that there's two key elements of induction support that should be included. One is providing a mentor from the same field, and two is providing common planning time for collaboration with other teachers, both of which Ellen had mentioned in her work and at the beginning of this webinar. And often it's mentioned about time for collaboration. And what people need to understand, that doesn't mean that we're sitting around the faculty room just talking and chatting. There are specific areas that the new teachers are collaborating with other lead teachers in their building about that helps to improve student achievement. At NTC, we actually go beyond just these two with very specific research-based components that lead to, the next slide, please. 90% of our NTC trained mentors and coaches remained in the district after 5 years. This is the result of our seed district, and we provide a comprehensive package of supports. Mentors with subject or grade level expertise, opportunities to participate in group or collective planning, communication, ongoing dialogue about progress and their best practices, rigorous process to select and train their mentors, and the use of a formative assessment system. So 90% retention of those new teachers is a very strong research point. Next slide, please. Additional independent research from 2012 from our SEED grant, and after 2 years of support, NTC support, new teacher retention in the district increased from increase of 31%, up from 72% in pre-NTC involvement in 2009-10 to 94% retention post 2012-13. Next slide, please. And the research supporting our approach to induction was most recently, this last July, further expanded when the independent results of our work in the Federal Innovation Grant Districts of Chicago, Broward County, and Grantwood resulted in increased student achievement. The following slides highlight some details. Next slide. The research confirmed the fundamentals of our induction program have a positive impact on student learning. 1, significant time is needed per month between mentor and new teachers, approximately 180 minutes per month. And 2, intensive instructionally focused support one-on-one, and that leads to changes of teacher practice and positive impact on learning. Next slide, please. The NTC induction model is one of the few programs in the nation that can demonstrate statistically significant results in student learning. 2 to 5 months of accelerated student learning in math or English with NTC induction programs. Next slide, please. So with all of this research and our expertise in the field of new teacher support, in 2012, we did our first support from the start, which was a 50-state review of policies around new teacher induction and mentoring. In 2016, we produced the updated version. We put together this review so that everyone can take a look at their own state and see where they are on a continuum of increasing supports and standards for new teacher support. This individual report was actually referenced in the most recent U.S. Department of Ed guidelines on the use of the Title IIA funds as part of the new federal law, Every Student Succeeds Act, or what is known as ESSA. So if you want to see where your state is on this topic, download a copy of this report, and I'm going to go over highlights of a few of the pieces that are in the report over the next few slides. Next slide, please. We found in our review of state policy, what we found was disheartening. Since we first looked at this in 2012, very little had changed. In fact, in 2012, only 3 states included our most important criteria for high-quality educator induction programs. Those states were Connecticut, Delaware, and Iowa. In 2016, Hawaii was added. Next slide, please. Oops, I'm sorry. Yeah, multi-teacher induction. Okay, new state. Yeah, this slide. States which require induction and mentoring in either statute or in state board policy are shown here. White shows no requirements or no policy. Green representing no program length attributed to it. And then it goes from light blue to darker blue to purple. And you'll see that the majority of the states that have efforts required, that the most of those are in the light blue, which only requires 1 year of support. Next slide. Along with new induction and mentoring support for new teachers, we also examined those for administrators. Same color code exists on this key, but I think what's most interesting here is that most states do not provide such support, and those that do only support it for 1 year. Next slide, please. Mentor training. States which require training of mentors and require professional development are shown here. White states, no mention. Other states, training required or mentioned. Now remember, this says required or mentioned in their state work, but not necessarily in policy. And going down into the light purple and dark purples, with the states requiring both. Next slide, please. A look at program quality, such as the supports such as observation, formative assessment, feedback, professional learning communities. You can see that the number of states, the number of states that provide that are at on the low number of the scale. Next slide, please. And the last look of the comparison, we have states which provide state funding for new teacher induction, ranges from no funding at all, which would be the white states, to dedicated state funding, with the darker purple being those that have the strongest state funding. Next slide, please. One of the other ways that the New Teacher Center helps districts and states address recruitment and retention, in addition to our induction models, is we help states identify specific teaching conditions. And next slide, please. Through what we call our TEL survey. The acronym stands for Teaching, Empowering, Leading, and Learning. It's a voluntary, online, anonymous, full population survey, which was externally validated as part of the Gates Measures of Effective Teaching project in 2010. The questions on this survey are actually shown to be connected to student achievement and teacher retention. Next slide, please. The 8 constructs that are measured are shown to you on this slide, and it runs a gamut from school and teacher leadership to community support and engagement. Next slide, please. Since 2010, more than 1.6 million responses from teachers and administrators across 20 states have been gathered in our TEL survey. We have more than 40,000 individual school reports. Responses to these questions are posted publicly on the website by school, by district, and state, so that all stakeholders can see the responses and the results. And we've learned many things. The research base is eye-opening and has been a tremendous help, especially to legislators. No longer do legislators need to depend on anecdotal stories as a basis for funding education needs. The next slide, please. The biggest takeaway from across all of this information and gathering on teacher retention, the biggest takeaway is school leadership. When teachers are asked which aspect of your teaching conditions most affects your willingness to keep teaching at your school, the greatest percentage of answers are in school leadership. This is very similar to what Ellen showed as the results from the GATE survey in 2010. You'll see that other things matter to teachers, but overwhelmingly it is the influence of the school leadership and the qualities of the school leader in providing the supports needed at their school that influence their reason why they want to stay. Next slide, please. Which brings me up to something that I want to just throw out here as a teaser. In a few weeks, we are going to be releasing a report with Dr. Richard Ingersoll, the renowned national expert of teacher retention from the University of Pennsylvania. He partnered with us for a 2-year research project grant we received from the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 2015 to specifically study results on school and teacher leadership. His research will reflect almost 1 million responses to the TEL survey. We will be announcing more soon, but the connections to student achievement are powerful and something that we know you might be interested in. So we'll make sure that we send this along to Jeff. Next slide, please. As was mentioned by Ellen, the ESSA law and the state's compliance to design their own consolidated state plan this year and submit it to the U.S. Department of Ed is a great opportunity for districts and states. Just as the No Child Left Behind Act changed the accountability systems in the nation's schools for more than a decade, the ESSA plans will provide a roadmap for the education priorities in each state for the next 5 to 10 years. The ESSA law has significant influence over how districts plan and allocate their resources, and it gives state and district leaders greater flexibility to choose their improvement strategies. 9 state ESSA plans prioritize, 9 of the first 15 submitted prioritize induction, and more that are filed in September will also prioritize induction. At least 4 states have drawn upon the TEL survey data to strengthen their policies on teacher induction. 9 states use the TEL data in their school improvement plans and their ESSA plans. And I think what's really important for you as an audience to understand is that as these state ESSA plans are submitted to the U.S. Department of Ed and approved, and then begin the long process over this next year of implementing their plans, it is important to understand that the potential for utilizing the Title I and Title II funds in an effort to compound or to extend the state funding for all things related to new teacher support and teacher retention is a great opportunity with ESSA. We released an analysis of the first 10 states ESSA plans related to Title I and Title IIA funding, specifically around new teacher support and teacher retention. and we have additional 7 that will be coming up in the next week or 2. Next slide, please. So in summary, state policies around new teacher support, the research is in. We have wonderful, phenomenal research that showed independently that the programs that we provide show increase in student achievement and teacher retention benefits. No one state is a beacon on the hill when it comes to teacher induction. There's a small collection of states that do a number of things well and include core elements of their policies. And we've communicated that in our recent report of support from the start. State policies around teaching and learning conditions, the evidence is also in. The research is there, not just ours, but from across the nation. Teaching conditions are student learning conditions. Kentucky, North Carolina, and Oregon are leaders in the nation in this endeavor. And ESSA recognizes the importance of this, and that is why their states they encourage states to gather data from their teachers as part of their state ESSA plans. Next slide, please. Recommendations for policymakers. 1, adopt induction program standards such as NTCs, much like Learning Forward has pushed the adoption of its professional learning standards. These standards would help communicate and provide the structure for a comprehensive evidence-based induction program. 20 states currently have some program standards, but they're weak or dated. 2, provide targeted and competitive funding to seed high-quality induction. Again, you could look for combining this with your ESSA state plans for Title I and Title II. 3, adopt teaching and learning condition standards such as was done in North Carolina and Kentucky. And 4, gather the voices of teachers and administrators in a validated anonymous survey such as the TEL survey and utilize this data when making decisions on state resources and policy decisions around your educator effectiveness work in your state. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I want to thank you. And again, if you have any questions or need any of those documents or additional research, please feel free to reach out and we'll help supply that to you. Jeff?
All right, well, thanks, Ann, and thanks, Ellen. I think that was very interesting and helpful. And as I mentioned, for anybody who came on the call late, I'm going to get these PowerPoint presentations posted on the CSG West website. If you go there and look under policy committees, you'll find the Education and Workforce Development Committee, and we'll get them posted there. Another option is you could just email me and I'll get it to you that way, or you can email Ellen or Ann. And then the other thing is that the whole webinar will be archived on the CSG website. So if you missed anything, you can go back and get that later. So I want to encourage anyone to ask questions. You can submit them via the question block on your screen. And I will get it started. I have a question. And Ellen, I think you have written about, I believe you've written about millennials. And millennials change jobs all the time. Why should we expect teaching to be any different?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So millennials do have a reputation for not being committed to a particular profession. Although on the upside for the teaching profession, millennials also are the most education-minded generation. They're idealistic and optimistic, like their baby boomer parents, and really want to work at jobs that allows them to have a positive impact on the world. So they're really right for us to recruit and to recruit for the long term. The fact that they have that disposition to not stay loyal to one particular job or even profession, of course, will be a challenge. But when we look at the high-performing school systems abroad, they treat teaching as as the profession for the long term, and so that should be the same approach with the hope that, as in professions here, like medicine and law and engineering, where even the millennials do stay put, we can create the salaries and the conditions to make that the case in the teaching profession as well.
And so I guess this is for either of you. Wouldn't more non-traditional educational models like online education or homeschooling help with teacher shortages by reducing the need for teachers? And and in addition, what about work-based learning models in which older students spend part of their day learning from working professionals rather than teachers? Do those alternative approaches to teaching and learning, I mean, if we did more of that, could we reduce our need for teachers? Either one of you could answer.
So, I mean, I can start. This is Ellen. I mean, I certainly think, especially in rural areas, that it's worth considering how we can bring technology into our classrooms to make sure that every student has a high quality, accomplished teacher in front of them. It is hard to envision that in every single, very rural community, you're going to have someone in physics and chemistry and all of these subjects who really is able to deliver the content in the way that can help those students in those areas to achieve their potential. But as far as kind of making our policy focused one to reduce the need for teachers as opposed to focusing on making the profession an attractive one, I guess I'd go back to what I said in my previous comment about looking to the systems that have managed to achieve the best results and not in socialistic contexts, in a variety of political and economic models. And so I think, if they can do it, so can we. And it's just a matter of leaders at all levels of the system coming together and identifying, collaborating to find creative solutions, cost-efficient and effective solutions that will allow students to have access to actual teachers where possible, especially in light of the social emotional benefits to their learning that live teachers rather than just online virtual teachers can provide them.
And this is Anne. At New Teachers Center, we help districts work with their new teachers no matter what preparation they may have had. So they might be coming in from various alternative certified programs. They might be coming in from traditional, student preparation in the university systems. It doesn't matter which they are coming from. We help them, the districts, work with them and improve them and take them to the next level of effectiveness. The question of whether or not that addresses teacher shortages is something that is currently still in discussion across the nation, and there are different groups that offer different answers to that. But all I can say is that we are in the business of helping them get better, no matter where they come from, what they did, but how they can improve once they get in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Are either of you aware of any states that require an exit survey for teachers when they're leaving their jobs?
I am. This is Anne. In many states, especially the state where I worked as the governor's teacher advisor, they used to ask such survey. It was required by the legislature, and then they would have an annual report on why teachers left. And what they found out after many years of that, and then many years of the teaching conditions survey in the same state, was that the information that was coming in off of the exit exam or exit, questionnaire is really what it was, that information was not very accurate because people did not want to burn bridges. They didn't want to they weren't very honest with it. And that's why we switched to the questions that were used in the TEL survey about what are your intent to stay teaching, and utilize that information as more valuable to legislators than such an exit survey might produce.
Okay. I just got another question. What does the research, either yours or others, what does it say about programs like Teach for America, which assume that teachers don't need a long-term commitment to stay in the classroom? Are programs like that helpful or not?
So this is Ellen. I mean, there is some positive research about Teach for America, especially for the STEM subject areas where we have really poor, or really troubling teacher shortages. In terms of the effectiveness of those STEM teachers. I mean, the challenge is that right, we don't have, and in some cases, there's some research to suggest that they, I don't know the exact number, but they often do stay beyond just the 2 years. But, if our vision is for a teaching profession that, like in the top performing countries and like in the highly esteemed U.S. professions that don't suffer such great shortages, that it's just a short-term solution. I think the model of even Teach for America is not that it's okay to work towards that type of short-term career, but rather that they are getting a lot of smart young people into the profession with the hopes that they would stay longer than the 2 years, and in many cases they do stay longer than the 2 years. And so I think it falls upon the policy and education community to work together to try to make that happen more often, such that these folks who come into the profession through Teach for America want to and do stay.
And this is Anne. Just to add to that is, the evidence is out there that, and I think Ellen mentioned it, and I know that our work references it, that if you can keep the good teachers that you've got, you're going to help reduce that teacher shortage tremendously. And I think that policymakers would save money and help student achievement if we focused on helping what we've got get better and keep them.
All right. Well, thank you. I guess we've only got like 2 minutes left, but I just wanted to give you a chance to reiterate one thing that I think came up in both of your presentations is the issue of teacher pay. It seems like it's a bigger issue for those considering the profession than for those once they're in the profession. Is that something either of you would like to elaborate on?
If I might go first on that one.
Sure.
Sure.
People often ask why in our TEL survey we don't include any question about salary or compensation or stipends or anything. And the answer is that even though you might think, yes, that is a teaching condition, it's a political question. And we have stayed clear of that because of the fact that each state determines its own teacher salary and compensation system. And we do know that people will say that salary is important, and of course we would like to see all salaries increase. We would like to see a professionalism with the salary base, but it is important, but it's not the only reason why teachers don't stay.
And I'll add to that by saying, by reminding us that the slide that I showed on teachers' views of the factors that would improve teacher retention did show that over 80% thought that higher teacher pay was either very important or absolutely essential for improving teacher retention. So it is important. But what we have to remember is that people who went into the profession went in knowing that the pay was what it was, and so they're less likely to cite pay then. It's less likely to be as much of a challenge for them than for the many people who've decided to not go into the profession because of that reason. But there is certainly survey evidence to suggest that pay is very important, beyond the survey evidence that I just cited, that pay is an important teacher retention factor. There's also some survey evidence to suggest that there could be socially acceptable response bias, such that it might be even a bigger drawback than what we see. But it's certainly very clear from that McKinsey & Company survey of top third college students that for young people considering which profession to choose, pay is the most important drawback that they perceive.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate your time, and I want to thank everyone for calling in and joining us on the webinar. I think this is very helpful and informative. And again, if anyone wants further information, you can reach me. You can reach either of the speakers, and we'll get you whatever. We'll try to answer whatever questions you have. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you'll join us for future webinars. Take care. Thank you.